Hello, first graders. Happy Monday. Today's lesson in CKLA is called History of Space Exploration and Astronauts. Okay, so if you have this packet, I want you to flip to this page. Okay, it's got a number line on it, and then it's got some words that are going to tell you what's happening at that point in time as far as the exploration of space is concerned. So go ahead and flip to that page. Looks like this again if you need to see it. If you don't have this paper, that is okay. Just make sure you're listening so that you know the same things that we're filling out, okay? So before I get started on my read aloud, I do want to read those blanks that we're going to be looking, or the blanks that we're going to be filling in. So the words that we're going to be looking for, or the events that we're going to be looking for. So the first one says blank invented the first rockets in the 1200s. Okay. The next one says year blank, the first rocket launch from Cape Canaveral. I don't know that I'm saying that correctly. And then the next one says year blank, Soviet Sputnik, first man-made object in orbit. Then we've got year blank, Soviet Yuri Gagarin, first made in space. Year blank, Alan Shepard, first American in space. And that's going to be the last one on our timeline for this, okay? And I'll probably read these again right before we start the actual story. But I just wanted to let you know what we're listening for. All right. Excuse me. Our learning targets for today. We are going to identify the 4 phases of the moon, which you guys should already know how to do. We're going to describe the experiences of the first astronauts. We are going to demonstrate an understanding of the word launch. We are going to identify and write opinion statements. And we are going to write the experiences of the first astronauts in our journal. Our key vocabulary are astronaut, launch, rockets, spacecraft, and technology. Astronaut. An astronaut is a person who is trained to travel in space. Okay. Now, some of you might accidentally be mistaking an astronomer for an astronaut, but they're a little bit different, okay? So astronauts, which is what you see in this picture, are the people who are trained to actually go out into space, okay? Astronomers are scientists who study space, but they do that from Earth mainly, okay? So try not to get those two mixed up. So astronomer is a scientist, and an astronaut is the person who travels in space, okay? All right, launch. Launch is a verb. It is an action word, and it means to lift or push an object forcefully, okay? In the afternoon, they plan to launch the rocket into the air. Rocket ship. Or no, sorry, not rocket ship, just rocket. My face is covering the word. Rockets. Rockets are engines that are used to send things through the air onto space. Okay? The rockets shot straight up into the air. Spacecraft. Spacecraft is a vehicle for traveling in space. A spacecraft has many strong layers to protect the astronauts, which are the people who travel in space, as they travel in space. Technology. Ooh, technology is the use of new scientific discoveries to solve common problems. Okay. My mom said that all telephones used to be connected by a wire to the wall, but that technology has changed a lot since then. So we are learning using technology, right? We are learning through the computer. Ms. Van Wert had to learn some technology too so that she could make these videos for you. Okay. All right, so let's review some stuff, and then I'm going to talk about some new things, okay? So I want you to tell me about the Earth's rotation, or no, sorry, not the Earth's rotation. I want you to tell me about the moon's rotation and its orbit around the Earth. So let's think back to when we were learning about the moon last week. Let me grab my Earth. Here is my Earth. I don't know where my moon went. It must have been taken by one of the animals. So we're going to pretend that this is the moon. So the moon is going to spin or rotate, right? It's going to spin or rotate. But it's also going to go around the Earth, okay? So it's going to orbit the Earth and it's going to rotate. It moves in the same way that the Earth moves around the sun, right? But how long does it take the moon to make one full orbit or to go all the way around the Earth? About how long does it take? About 1 month, right? The Earth takes a whole year to get around the sun, but the moon only takes 1 month to get around the Earth. About how long does it take for the moon to rotate or spin around one time? The same amount of time, right? 27 days or about 1 month. So the moon rotates and orbits the Earth just as the Earth rotates and orbits the sun. Who can remember the phases of the moon? What's it called when it looks like a toenail? What's that called? It's not called a toenail moon. It's called a crescent moon, okay? And what about when it's a half, you can only see half of it? What's it called? A half moon. And after the half moon, we get something that is like 3/4 of the moon. So it's not quite all the way, just a little bit. It's like missing a toenail. Think about it. It's missing just a piece of the toenail. It's called a gibbous. Okay. And then what about when you can see the entire moon? When you can see that whole moon, what do we call it? A full moon. And what about when we can't see any moon at all? It's called a new moon. Very good. And if I said that the moon is waxing, does that mean that it looks like it's growing or it looks like it's shrinking? Waxing. When I say waxing, that means that it looks like it's growing. Okay. What about if I say that it's waning? Does it look like it's shrinking or growing? If it's waning, it looks like it's shrinking, right? So the title for today's read aloud is History of Space Exploration and Astronauts. What do you think space exploration means? How would people explore space? I don't know. Let's find out. What's an astronaut? That's a vocabulary word that we just went over, so you should know this one. An astronaut is someone who is trained to travel in space. How and why do you think space travel might have started, and what do you think it was like for those very first astronauts? Do you think they were afraid? Do you think they were excited? Do you think they were nervous? Do you think they were probably feeling a whole bunch of feelings at the same time? That's probably what I would guess. All right, remember our key vocabulary. Astronaut, which is somebody who travels into space, versus an astronomer, which would be a scientist that studies space from the ground, from Earth. Launch, rockets, spacecraft, and technology. Listen carefully to find out whether or not your predictions about space exploration are correct. Now, also listen, because we're going to be listening for these things. We're looking for who invented the first rockets, the year that the first rocket launched from Cape Canaveral, the year that Soviet Sputnik was the first man-made object to orbit in orbit, the year that Soviet Yuri Gagarin was first made in space, and then the year that Alan Shepard who was the first American in space. Okay, so we're listening for those things, and I'll help you. Okay. Ever since they first gazed up at the stars, people have wondered if it was possible and what it would be like to travel into outer space. For most of our human history, the idea of traveling into space was considered to be impossible. Space, most people thought, was out of reach, and there was no way humans would ever be able to get there. Still, this didn't keep people from using their imaginations and coming up with creative ideas for travel in space. The Chinese invented the first rockets. Let me say that again. The Chinese invented the first rockets. That is our first blank, Chinese. Okay, so you're going to write in your first blank, you're going to write it's hard to write on the screen. Chinese. That's not a 5. That's a S. It just doesn't look like it. All right. So that's your first blank. The Chinese, they invented the first rocket. Rockets are engines that push things into air. Okay. The Chinese invented the first rockets hundreds of years ago by using gunpowder, the same type of explosive used to fire guns and cannons. Lighting the gunpowder would launch or lift and push forcefully the rocket into the air. Eventually, people thought about using rockets to go all the way to outer space. It was not until about 100 years ago that scientists started to make serious advances or progress in rocket technology, or started to apply the discoveries they made in rocket science. Okay. I get out of the marker, and I'll leave that word up for you guys. Okay, the rockets you see here are some of those early rockets incorporating new technology. By the 1950s, probably around the time your grandparents were born, or just a little bit before then, rocket technology had improved to the point that people began to think seriously about space travel and exploration. So now they're starting to believe that maybe we could get to space. Okay. Back then, there was a nation called the Soviet Union, which no longer exists today, but which consisted of Russia and other countries near Russia. So we live in the United States right here. If we turn our globe around, Russia is right here. Okay, so we have to go across the ocean to get to Russia. It's on the opposite side of the globe. Okay. At the time, the United States was the only other nation in the world as large as or as strong as the Soviet Union. The leaders of the Soviet Union and the United States each wanted to show the world that theirs was the more powerful country by being the first to launch a rocket into outer space. So the Soviet Union, which was the place that is across the ocean from us, they wanted to show that they were more powerful. But the United States, which is where we live, we wanted to show that we were more powerful. And the way that they were going to show that was by being the first person or the first country to get into space, right? So both the people in the Soviet Union and the people in the United States wanted to be the first people in space because that's how they were going to show that they were more powerful. Yeah, okay, that's what I read. I wanted to make sure I didn't skip something on that page. This photo shows scientists in the United States launching the first rocket from Cape Canaveral, Florida in 1950. Going to read that sentence again, and you tell me if you hear anything that we've been looking for. This photo shows scientists in the United States launching the first rocket from Cape Canaveral, Florida in 1950. If we look at our paper, the next blank we have says year blank, first rocket launch from Cape Canaveral. So what year was it? I'm going to read it one more time. Listen up for that year. This photo shows scientists in the United States launching the first rocket from Cape Canaveral, Florida in 1950. So your next blank is going to be 1950. 1950. Okay. All right. This was just a test to see whether this type of rocket engine worked. This was the first of hundreds of rockets to be launched from Cape Canaveral. Pretty cool, right? Oops, I need to switch back to my pointer. Ooh, I wonder what this is. The Soviet Union succeeded in putting the first man-made object in orbit on October 4th, 1957, by launching a satellite called Sputnik 1. I think we were listening for Sputnik. Let's look back at our paper. This paper, the next one says, year blank, Soviet Sputnik was the first man-made object in orbit. That's what we just read about, so let's see if we can hear the year. Ready? The Soviet Union succeeded in putting the first man-made object in orbit on October 4th, 1957, by launching a satellite called Sputnik 1. So what was the year? 1957. So 1957. Okay. Excuse me. A satellite is let me try that one. I'm just going to read that whole piece again. The Soviet Union succeeded in putting the first man-made object in orbit on October 4th, 1957, by launching a satellite called Sputnik 1. A satellite is any object that moves in a constant orbit around another object in space. So some satellites teach us about space by taking photographs. Sputnik 1 was carried into space aboard a rocket and then released. It didn't have an engine like the rocket, so it couldn't get into space by itself. It orbited the Earth for several months before re-entering the atmosphere and burning up. That's what happens to meteors that hit the Earth's atmosphere too. After the success of Sputnik 1, the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union had begun. It wasn't a real race with a start and a finish line, but both countries wanted to be the first to go to space. Each country wanted to prove that it had a better space program than the other country. For several years, the Soviet Union continued to lead the space race. The leaders and people of each country took the space race very seriously. It was not a game, but a true matter of national pride. So now, what we're learning is that now the race is really started, right? They're very excited. They're ready to get people in space, super competitive, and they want to win because they want to show that their country is the best. right? We want to show that our country is the best, and they want to show that their country is the best. And then it also said that for several years, so for many years, the Soviet Union was winning, okay? They were in the lead. Oopsie, I need my pointer. I forget that every time. Here we go. The United States developed a space program called the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA for short. The scientists at NASA hurried to try to catch up with the progress of that the Soviets had made. A few months after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, NASA scientists in the United States launched a satellite of their own, Explorer 1. That's what is in the picture. Okay, so remember, so the Soviets had launched Sputnik. That was their satellite, and then after that, the United States launched their own satellite, and that satellite was called Explorer 1. And that's what is in this picture. The space race continued at a heated pace into 1961. Both countries were trying hard to win for 11 years. When Soviet Yuri Gagarin, became the first person to go into space and return safely. Whoa. Okay. I think that was something we were listening for. Let's look back at our paper. The next one on our paper says year blank. Soviet Yuri Gagarin was the first man in space. Now we got to figure out on the read aloud what year it was. So listen up carefully. You're listening for the year. The space race continued at heated pace into 1961 when Soviet Yuri Gagarin became the first person to go into space and return safely. So what year was it? 1961. So 1961. This is a picture of Gagarin, and it was taken on the way to the launch pad for his historic journey. You can bet he was feeling very nervous at that point. Why do you think that he was feeling nervous? Why would he be nervous? What does he have to be nervous about? Because he's the first person to go up there, and if you listen carefully, if you listen carefully to what it said he was the first person to go into space and return safely. So that kind of makes me think that maybe there were other people that went up into space but didn't make it back safely. So it was dangerous, right? He didn't know if he was going to be able to come back safely or not. He didn't know if he would die in space or if he would make it back home. Okay, so that would be a reason to be nervous. What about, what if something happened to the rocket? Or what if he got lonely? Or, there are a whole bunch of reasons to be nervous, right? You're going someplace new that not many people do go. All right. Oh my goodness. I keep forgetting to click the pointer before I try to go to the next page. Here we go. The Americans were close behind. A couple of months after Gagarin made his famous flight, a man named Alan Shepard became the first American to travel into space. So it was in that same year, but just a couple of months later, that's when the first American, Alan Shepard, was the first American to travel in space, okay? This is a picture. Oh, wait. That was something we were listening for. So what year was it? If it was the same year as the Soviet, what year did he go in? Yep, he also went in 1961. I don't know that worked. Why is it doing that? 1961. So the bottom two are going to be 1961. All right. This picture was taken shortly before Shepard boarded the Freedom 7 space. Oh my goodness. This picture was taken shortly before Shepard boarded the Freedom 7 spacecraft. A spacecraft is a vehicle used for traveling beyond Earth's atmosphere. Notice that, like Gagarin, I cannot pronounce his last name, Shepard was wearing a helmet and a special suit. Space travelers need special gear like this in order to survive the extreme conditions of outer space, where there is no air and where the temperatures can be both incredibly hot and incredibly cold. So there's no air inside the suit, there is air inside the suit so that the astronauts can breathe, okay? Ow, pull my hair. Oh my goodness. Forgetful today. Returning from outer space is just as dangerous as launching into outer space because you crash into the atmosphere on the way back like meteors do. This photo shows the Freedom 7, Alan Shepard's ship, after his flight. Shepard is inside that little capsule, a small closed space that keeps a pilot or astronaut safe when traveling or landing. So he is inside of there. Okay. When his flight was finished, the capsule re-entered the atmosphere and a parachute opened to lower it gently to Earth. Shepard landed in the ocean as planned, and the capsule floated there until a helicopter came to recover him. Space travelers like Alan Shepard are called astronauts. The word astronaut comes from two Greek words, astro meaning star, and naut meaning sail. So an astronaut is a star sailor, or a person who is trained to travel into space. Although being an astronaut can certainly be one of the most interesting jobs in the world, it by no means is an easy job. Astronauts spend years in training to prepare for journeys into outer space. Astronauts must be healthy and strong because space travel can be very difficult. Astronauts are stuffed into tiny spaces and launched into space in a rocket powered by thousands of powerful... Guys, I'm sorry. I'm not awake this morning, apparently. Astronauts are stuffed into tiny spaces and launched into space in a rocket powered by thousands of gallons of powerful fuel. It is scary and it is uncomfortable, but astronauts will put up with it. This picture shows astronauts undergoing training. These Apollo 17 astronauts are learning to use equipment for their mission. So you see they're learning how to use the equipment, and they've got suits on, right? Early NASA astronauts also spend hours and hours running in place on treadmills, soaking their feet in ice water, and undergoing a number of other difficult, painful tests intended to make them tough. They had to be tough to be astronauts. Pretty cool story, right? All right, so I'm going to clear these in just a minute. So if you need to pause the video and make sure that you have these written down on this page, go ahead and pause it and write those down. All right, now I've got to clear those. Okay, there we go. All right, comprehension questions and word work. Let's do it. So before the read aloud, you predicted how and when space travel might have begun. Were your predictions correct? In the 1950s, the Soviet Union and the United States competed to see who could get to space first. What did we call this competition? The space race. They were racing to see who could get into space first. The Soviet Union was the first country to launch an object into space? The satellite Sputnik 1. How did they get it into space? Because remember, Sputnik 1 didn't actually have its own, it didn't get there on its own because it didn't have, what didn't it have? It didn't have an engine. Okay. So how did it get up there? They launched it on a rock. They launched a rocket that was carrying it, right? And then the rocket fell down once the satellite got into space. The United States wanted to catch up to the Soviet Union, so they started the NASA program and launched a satellite into space too. Then both countries launched something else, even more important, into space. What did they send next? After the satellites, what did they send? People, also known as astronauts. And who remembers what astronauts means? Star sailors, right? People who travel into space. You heard at the beginning, oh my goodness. You heard that being one of the first astronauts was not an easy job. What were some of the challenges that they faced? Training was hard. They had to run on treadmills and they had ice water tests. And space travel was unknown and risky, right? They didn't really know what was going to happen to them. They didn't know if they were going to be safe. Would you have wanted to be one of the first astronauts to go up in space? Why or why not? I wouldn't have, because I would be afraid that I wouldn't make it back. I think it would be cool, but I also don't think that I would want to because I think I would be too scared. All right, word work time. In the read aloud you heard, lighting the gunpowder would launch the rocket into the air. Say the word launch with me. Launch. Can you say it in a whisper voice? Launch. How about in a mouse voice? Launch. Launch means to lift or push an object forcefully. I pretend my table is a runaway and then I launch, sorry, not a runaway, a runway, when I launch my paper airplane into the air. So they take their paper airplane and they launch it, meaning they throw it or they push it, right, with force, and they send it into the air. Tell me about an object that you can launch. Use the word launch when you talk about it. What's the word we've been talking about? Launch. Very good. Okay. Why isn't that going to the next page? Okay. So let's talk about our learning targets and make sure that we have gone over all of them. Did we identify... Guys, I'm so sorry. I really don't know why I'm so tired this morning. Did we identify the 4 phases of the moon? Yes. Did we describe the experiences of the first astronauts? Yes. Did we demonstrate an understanding of the word launch? Mm-hmm. Now, we didn't do this part yet, but we're going to. Well, we did part of it. We identified opinion statements, right? We talked about our opinion. Would we want to go into space? That's your opinion, okay? That's based on you. My opinion could be different than your opinion. And then you're gonna write that down in your astronomy journal. That's gonna be one of your sentences. And then after you write your opinion of I would like to be an astronaut and travel to space, or I would not like to be an astronaut and travel into space, then you are going to describe the experiences of the first astronauts in your journal, okay? So you're going to have your first sentence, which is going to be, I would like to travel into space, or I would not like to travel into space. Then you are going to tell me 2 things that astronauts had to go through, or 2 things that astronauts would have experienced when going into space. Okay? All right, guys. Thanks for watching.